Hi class, my name is Andrew Parker and I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about the naturalist movement and its influence on literature. The naturalist movement is a movement that essentially branched off from realism, a movement that many more people are familiar with. In fact, there are a lot of authors that have identified themselves with both movements. Naturalist authors sought to identify the underlying causes for a person's actions and beliefs. It was strongly influenced by Freudian psychology and the theories of Charles Darwin. The image above depicts the separation of emotion from reason, which is one of the key components of this movement's ideology. In addition to the separation of pathology from rationality, there are many other components of the naturalist belief structure. Naturalists were relatively pessimistic and they believed that people's future was manifested in the environment that they inherited. For example, a naturalist would believe that a person who is born into a poor family would in general be poor his or her entire life because of the socioeconomic barriers that he or she naturally inherits. Many naturalist works of literature depict a character in conflict with nature, society, or himself. Charles Darwin was one of the most influential people in the naturalist movement. Lots of naturalist writers attempted to apply Darwin's discoveries and ideas about the natural world to society and human nature. The writers from this movement curated characters that were a product of their social environment, sort of like the way Darwin shows a species as part of its ecosystem. They apply the concept of inheritance, heredity, and survival to human society and culture. Freud's psychoanalytic theory and debate over nature versus nurture inspired the characters of many naturalist authors. He believed that people did have some naturally derived characteristics, but that much of human nature and human development was determined by the surrounding environment. In some ways, this environment can seem to be inescapable and defining. Some of the most relevant novels that defined the naturalist period are Stephen Crane's The Red Badge of Courage, Frank Norris's McTeague, and Edith Wharton's Ethan Frome. Each of these stories identifies with different characteristics of naturalist literature. Crane questions human nature and demonstrated his belief that humans were not made to be at war with one another. Norris takes influence from Charles Darwin and questions the way that people overcome animalistic nature that we all still possess subconsciously, instead becoming very uniquely advanced. He traces the superiority of the human race back down to its roots and shows how people don't truly rise above acting upon instinct. Wharton pessimistically touches on the inability of impoverished people to break free of the socioeconomic burdens that they face. She shows how truly difficult it is for somebody to move up the social ladder, even in a society like that of America, which is less stratified. The Red Badge of Courage was a story written about warfare from the point of view of the human psyche. It was deliberately set up and told so that the readers couldn't really conceptualize the real value of fighting the war in the first place, and neither could the soldiers. Many of the soldiers remained unnamed throughout the book, and Crane, as the author, makes no real definitive commentary on the subject matter. He, he only describes the events and leaves most of the novel open to interpretation. In McTeague, the main character, a somewhat successful dentist, has well-meaning but overly ambitious goals of improving his economic situation. He's relatively narrow-minded and really only sees what's in front of him, which proves to be his downfall. He shows the readers how human nature is inherently nearsighted and in some ways self-destructive. Ethan Frome is a story about a rural Massachusetts family whose poverty impedes their ability to experience even the slightest bit of fulfillment in their lives. The isolation of the small world that they live in and the cold, harsh Massachusetts winters add to the harsh and depressing tone of the novel overall. This story seeks to demonstrate how people's futures are somewhat predetermined by the physical environment that they're surrounded by and raised in. Overall, the naturalist movement was short-lived and many of the writers that identified with it saw little success. It's a realistic but also depressing outlook on society and human behavior. It is, however, very relatable to some people and resonates in bigger themes and issues of poverty, war, and human behavior and development that are discussed in modern times.